So in today's video I'm going to take you through my auxiliary battery system on my Prado 150 GXL 2021. I was asked to give a rundown of what I'd done and take you through it, give people an idea of what you have to consider and how you do it. So before I do that though, I think it's probably important just to go through quickly some of the considerations you need to think about in your system, because what you need will be different than what I've done. So by that I mean you can do a really basic thing of just buying an AGM battery and sticking it loose in the back of your car, connect your fridge to it, put it out, connect your solar to it when you're at campsite, and yeah, you could just do that. There are also other things on the market nowadays, like a battery box or a power station. So both of those items are portable. They go in the back of the vehicle, and yeah, they're portable. So the great thing is, you sell the vehicle, you take it with you, and you can use it in multiple vehicles. So they have their advantages, definitely. The disadvantage with those is they take up space, and if you're not towing and putting anywhere to put it other than the back of your vehicle, that space becomes very valuable. So those are your different options. For me, those didn't work because I needed the space, so I put in the dual battery under the bonnet. In my case, I started off with an AGM battery because that's the cheapest option, and that's lasted a few years. I was very happy with it. I guess the main shortfall with the AGM was the actual power output. So I had a 105 amp hour AGM, but you only get about 50% of it, so you're looking at about 50 amp hours of usable capacity. That was not becoming enough for me, because I now have a second fridge and then lights, so I needed the additional capacity of a lithium. So I upgraded to a lithium, and that's given me that capacity, and it's also saved me considerable weight. There's a lot of hoo-ha on the internet about lithium under bonnet. I don't understand it. I'm not getting into it, other than the fact that the one I'm using has got a 5-year warranty under bonnet, so I can't really argue with that. And it does the job, and it does the job well. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through the configuration. I'll talk a little bit about the options, starting with AGM and what you can and cannot do, and then I'll take you through how the wiring looks and then what I did. So close up now, the auxiliary battery. On the Prado 150, as I said, you've got a additional battery space, dual battery space. It's not, you only watch the size of it. So my original AGM was 305 mils lengthwise. That's probably about as much as you want to go. Some of them that are around 330 mils, you're going to start getting very tight in here. So I just suggest that if you are putting a battery in, you look at the N70 configuration size for an AGM. Because that can become a bit of an issue. Now on the later models of Prado, the battery base underneath the battery is very solid, and actually it's the same as the starter battery, so you don't need any additional support like a metal battery tray or anything. I've just got something underneath the battery, that's all, but basic, to protect it between that and the body of the vehicle, but you don't need anything additional. The other thing I did buy was I bought the same battery clamp that's on the starter battery. So I went to Toyota, got all the bits, and they all come separately, unfortunately, but that way I got the same battery clamp to hold the battery down. Unfortunately it's hiding under this particular fuse bracket at the moment, so you can't really see it, but that means that it fits exactly the right way within the battery. I'm sure there's plenty of other configurations you can get a little bit cheaper, but anyway, I thought instead of messing around, I did that. So I originally put AGM in, and then connected it up through a BCDC. So my BCDC is sitting in here, and I've got a red arc unit right here. This is the red arc 1225D. So what you need a BCDC for? Now that's a very good question. Do you need one? And I start to question that. And the reason I say that is, if you're running an AGM as your auxiliary battery, off your starter battery, you obviously need to charge it when the engine's running, and the BCDC will do that for you. So your starter battery connects to your BCDC, and then you connect that to your auxiliary battery. The thing that I would argue a bit here is it's a bit of an overkill, to be honest with you. You can connect the two batteries together, and it will charge, so no reason why you can't just run wires from one battery to the second. The only thing with that option is that if you draw down on your auxiliary battery when you're camping, it will also draw down on your starter battery. So you can get a product called a smart solenoid, which you'll see down here, but I've actually got mine for a different reason. But anyway, this smart solenoid is like a voltage sensing solenoid, and it'll break the circuit when the voltage of one of the batteries drops too low. So if it sees the starter battery dropping voltage, it will then cut the circuit open, or open the circuit and stop you drawing down on it anymore, which is great. It breaks basically the connection if the voltage starts to drop on one side. The actual specs of that will be determined by the manufacturer of your smart solenoid. That's an SBI 12, I think. It's a red arc unit as well. So the answer, first question really is, do you need to spend $500 on a BCDC, a charger? No, you don't. If you're using AGM, you can go straight for that. Would I have done it differently? Yeah, I probably would have just done that in the first place, be honest with you, although the smart solenoids are probably about a couple of $100 anyway. So right, so that said, now however, if you do upgrade to lithium later, you are going to need something like this, because of the two different battery chemistries, and the charging voltages are different. You can go for a cheaper BCDC. What I went for, as I said, was the red arc unit. I managed to get the bracket, because for the Prado you need the bracket to fit it in. Some places sell them together. I actually got them separately because I got it cheaper that way, but buying them separately. That fits in here quite nicely. You then run the cabling. The cabling is very short from the BCDC, so do all your wiring loom before you bolt it in. So lay out your BCDC on the top here, lay out your cables, and do all that. So what I did was, I'm going to just take you down here. So I ran my cables across here in front of the radiator to existing looms, used corrugated protection as well, and they're all in front of the radiator. Keeping them in front of the radiator obviously keeps them away from heat. They then feed up round the corner here, up through and up into the starter battery. So tucked down here, tight by the radiator, and then on the other side, obviously I ran them across in front of the radiator and up, and you can just see them running up in here through to the auxiliary battery. So the next thing you need to think about is fuses. So of course you must put in the recommended fuses if you're going to use a BCDC, or if you're connecting batteries or connecting anything to batteries, should be fused. So these are what's called MIDI fuses. Now, I've got a number of them on here. So this is actually the BCDC one. I've labeled them. Interestingly, these labels have stayed on for several years, so that seems to work. So that's obviously where the cable comes up and then goes to feed the positive of the auxiliary battery. You do the same thing across on the starter battery, so you need to fuse it there as well. Then the negatives, well, you obviously need to get good negatives on your auxiliary battery and to your BCDC, so make sure you do that. I actually did it by running, I actually did run the negative right back to the starter battery to ensure a good quality negative cable, to ensure that I had full negative polarity on the auxiliary battery and BCDC. And to be honest with you, negative issues on vehicles are one of the biggest problems if you're getting voltage issues on your vehicle. So you've really got to make sure your negatives are very good indeed. Okay, so now we've got the BCDC connected between the two. And a quick note here, when you get a BCDC, it talks about smart alternators. So the Prado here, it's not technically what they call a smart alternator. so which means you don't have to connect the additional wire on the red arc unit. I think it's the blue wire from memory. I might check that and put it on the screen for you. But basically, smart alternators, what they do is that when the vehicle doesn't need the voltage anymore, it drops the output voltage from the alternator to save power, energy consumption. So the Prado doesn't have it, so as I said, but anyway, long story short, just check your settings, but it makes it easy on the Prado. You just connect it straight up. So that's done. So next you have to also think about getting cable to the back of the vehicle. And actually, sorry, whilst we're talking about cable, you need to consider cable sizes. It depends on the cable you buy and the length of your runs, but very, very important, this one, to get good size cables. The bigger the better, generally speaking. So between obviously the two batteries and the BCDC, you want some pretty substantial cables. You're going to draw, so the 1225D draws a maximum of 25 amps. So you need to make sure that your cable is rated for that. I actually went for a 6AWG, which is a maximum on this distance of 50 amps. So that's, I say, well within the 25 that I've got, and you should really go far higher than you're actually going to need. So bigger cable the better. And then think about your cable run as you run then across the vehicle. What does that length of cable look like? From then we need to run a cable to wherever you're going to draw your power off from your auxiliary battery. So I ran mine to the back of the vehicle because that's where my fridge sits, and that's where my switching sits. So I'll take you down there in a minute. So you need to look at the length of your cable and then make a decision on the size of your cable. So one tip I would give you here, and I just said it, is go big as you can. There's one regret I have. I think I went for a 6 square cable, 6mm square cable. That is a maximum of 15 amps over 6 meters. So I'm probably slightly less than that distance, but you have to consider the return if you're using earth or negative all the way back to the battery, or you negative at the back of the vehicle somewhere. So if you're negative at the back of the vehicle, you can use that full length, otherwise you have to cut it in half. So by that I mean, so we've got 15 amps over that, so that'll be enough, but I need to really consider that if I'm going to put anything extra in there. If I was to do it again, I'd run a bigger cable to the back, there's no doubt about it. I would definitely have done that. Anyway, so where did the cable go? So I took it down the side, took it actually in through the firewall. I think right up here it goes in here, pretty hard to see, and it went in through the firewall. And then we take it from inside. I'm not going to rip it all apart for you today, but I will say that it came in through under the behind the driver's pedals. It comes behind this plastic cover. I then had to remove all the covers here, trim, take it all the way down here. I'll tell you something, it was a nightmare getting it through the pillar here. Put a piece of wire through in the end and pulled it through. And then that went all the way to the back. And I'll take you around the back. So when we got into the back, apologies about the mess in here and the fridge. So that then terminated, or came up to this point here, above the wheel arch, the plastic covering, and then I put in an Anderson connector here for my fridge, as you can see, which is in place. One of them, I've got two fridges actually, but this one's in here at the moment. So yeah, that's where that sat. But also what I did was I wired then across for my lights and additional sockets. So I actually took a wire from there, another as large as I could get, across here, ran it under, had to remove the plastic cover from the end here, and took it all the way across, all the way across to this side, and actually use this little cubby hole that comes off, because I wasn't doing much else with it, to put in a switch unit here. And this has been really good, I'm really happy with this. And then I run my switches and lights from here. So I've got another Anderson plug here, which is switched straight from here. My numbering's not very good, but I've also got an additional light sitting here, just to give me extra light when I'm camping. I've got roof lights up here, a couple of roof lights and one on the side, so I've got a couple of lights here, and then obviously this particular one's got the 12-volt cigarette lighter and then a USB, so it keeps all the power here. So basically all the power comes to the back of the vehicle now, and I can do all the switching and plugging in from here without having to open the bonnet or do anything under there. So that's how I got the power to the back. Cable length and cable size are very important here, but you certainly need to consider that. Alright, and we'll go back to the battery and I'll talk through some of the options there. So solar input's your next consideration. So obviously we talked about engine charging through the alternator when you're driving, but obviously when you're camping that's not the case. So I've got a couple of options for solar input. So I put solar connector here basically, so I can connect my solar straight onto here. I have to lift the bonnet to do it, but it keeps it out of the way, keeps it clean. I actually then wired up a second one up on the roof, and that goes up to the roof rail, and the reason that goes to the roof rack goes right to the back. Actually I'll show you. So I ran that literally up the window, took it all the way up and ran it across here, ran it all the way to here. So this is actually quite useful, because when you're parked up in a campsite or wherever, I can either put my solar straight on the roof rack and then just plug it straight in here, or if it's behind, the sun's behind the vehicle somewhere, I use that to plug straight in, and then I don't have to run the cable all the way to the front of the vehicle. So now back at the front, one of the things I discovered, and this is where I started to hit issues with the setup that I had the AGM, as I said, and the BCDC campsites. You know, this is a Prado, and when the doors are open, you can actually switch the lights off, so you're not pulling down battery power from your starter battery. But I did find over 2 to 3 days of not using the vehicle, the starter battery voltage would drop off to a point where I wanted to give it a boost. So I came up with this, Red Arc have got a help page on this around how you can, what they call, use the charge back. So when you connect your solar to your Red Arc unit, obviously through this, that's why back to the Red Arc BCDC, that charges the auxiliary battery. They do a thing called a charge back circuit, and you'll see I've built in a charge back here. That means that when this voltage gets to a certain voltage, it will then charge back and allow the additional voltage to flow to the starter battery, and that is actually where my solenoid comes in. And so that's on a charge back circuit. That's smart solenoid down there is used as a smart back. Now you don't actually need this, and I'm not suggesting you do it for one bit. In fact, I'd probably say don't do what I've done here, because it was probably not good use of money. Just telling you why I did it. So the problem I had with this when I did it was that you then have to have some relays or break the connection. So first of all, you have to break the connection between the standard BCDC output of the starter battery and coming back again. Otherwise you get this infinite loop. It'll bring that on, and then you just, so you have to be able to isolate the circuit for the Red Arc unit to see, because it'll see high voltage on the starter battery again, and it'll switch on and then try to start back again, and it, as I said, just gets into a loop. The other thing you need to do is you can't run it when the vehicle's running, so you've obviously got to decide that it's, you know, at what point you have to switch it with a relay. So I got into, anyway, long story short, it all was too complicated. I didn't like the idea. So what I eventually did was I took out the relays and went to a manual process. So you'll actually see here I've got a manual isolator for my BCDC. So when I pull up at a campsite, I will actually isolate my BCDC from my starter battery. And a word of note here also, even I actually think that the BCDC has a very slow current draw when it's not in use, so when your vehicle's parked up. And I did find that I was still getting a little bit of voltage loss on the starter battery. So what I do now is when I'm not going camping, day-to-day driving, I actually leave that in the open position, so I break the circuit for the BCDC, because I don't need to be charging my auxiliary battery the whole time. If you're like me and you don't go every week camping and need it, then I actually switch it off, and that's been so much better on my starter battery. It's been much better for it. So my one big tip from this is, if you do this and you don't go camping every weekend, put in a manual isolator and switch it off when you don't need it. You got to remember to put it on when you need it, obviously, because otherwise it won't charge when you're driving. And I do put it on every now and then just to give it a boost to the battery if I use it. So anyway, long story short, my solenoid is also it's actually got a rocker switch at the back there, but I have to switch the solenoid on as well manually. So but that's for the charge back. But to be honest with you, the charge back I'm not so sure about in terms of value for money. One thing I would say is, before I put the charge back in, I used to just literally couple the regulator with the solar straight onto the starter battery and give it a boost. But if I'd known about the isolation, I probably should have done that at the very beginning. So the one other thing you might want to consider is battery monitoring. I started with a unit called a BM2. You can get them off eBay, about 35 bucks each. They connect directly across the positive and negative. I actually had two. I had one on the starter battery, one on the auxiliary battery. They'll keep an eye on the state of charge of the battery and the voltage, but they're very rough, fundamental, but they'll do the job to start with. Low cost, they'll certainly get you there. Again, I've upgraded and I've put in something called a smart shunt, and I've actually got a Victron smart shunt in here. Again, a lot more money, but it monitors, so it's actually tucked down here in front of the battery. You can't see it, unfortunately, but it basically, all the negatives of the auxiliary battery pass through that, so it can measure the current going in or current going out, and it can then calculate when it's full or drained. So it's much more accurate, and you can see current use almost in real time. Well, it is in real time, sorry. But again, you don't need that. You can just use a BM2. It is. I'll try and put a link in the description below of what that unit does. That's cheap and cheerful. All right. So I'm going to sum up the good, bad, and the ugly. So basically, to sum it all up, you don't need to spend a load of money. Take it one step at a time. Don't go all out. But the only thing I would say is that if you do start doing hard wiring into your vehicle, really try and think ahead. So do think ahead of what you're going to do and how you might use it, and put in bigger cables than you really think you're ever going to need. Be sure you do. Try and do as much planning as you can beforehand. I ended up with a bit of spaghetti junction. I've tidied it up a bit, but you can't plan for everything. I understand that, and then really keep it simple. Just keep it simple. So I tried to make it too complicated by putting in relays on chargeback and trying to automate all that stuff, and that just made it too complicated. Too many things to go wrong. It was too difficult. To be honest with you, I just got fed up with it, took it all out, and I'm an electrical person, so it's up to you, but I'm just saying, just keep it simple. A manual switch is really what you need if you need something. Don't complicate it with relays. You're adding another layer of complexity and something else to go wrong when you're out on the road.